I'm very pleased to welcome Bud Hopkins to the program today. I'm so proud to have Bud with us. Later, we're going to have a few minutes of a special. There's something extraordinary happened this week. Dave Louthan will be with us. Dave is the man who on December 26th actually slaughtered with his own hands the cow that was later discovered to be the mad cow that caused all the controversy. Now the USDA is saying the problem's over. Dave Louthan is saying not so. He's warning us, be careful. So stay with us after Bud, because this is very serious stuff. Bud, as wife Carol Rainey and he have written a phenomenal new book called Sight Unseen, Science, UFO, Invisibility, and Transgenic Beings. Carol is a distinguished documentarist in her own right. She has done documentaries and dramas for PBS, for cable networks, international TV. Recently, she did a program called What's New About Menopause for Nova. She has done animated children's videos, also other work for PBS. So these two extraordinary and distinguished people have come together to publish what I believe is very arguably the finest book on the abduction experience ever written. An awesome volume indeed, and welcome both of you to my radio program.
Thanks a lot, Whitley.
Well, thank you. That's a rather extravagant and flattering introduction. I very much appreciate it.
Oh, it's all entirely false. No, I'm joking. It's not false. It's absolutely heartfelt, every bit of it.
Right.
And now let's go, Bud. I hardly know where to begin in talking to you or to the two of you, because Sight Unseen, it gradually becomes overwhelming, the evidence that is presented in the book, and there are so many directions it goes in. Let's talk a little bit about some of the witnesses and some of the things like invisibility that you discuss in the early part of the book, because a large part of the book is about accepting the reality of the technologies that makes the abduction experience look like magic and look like dreams when it's not.
Right. In a strange way, I think the basic goal summarized of the book was to take the para out of paranormal and to make the distance between normal cutting-edge human technology and alien technology to reduce that margin as much as possible. And I think that's what the book attempted. And with Carol's involvement with cutting-edge science here, I think we're getting close to that idea.
Well, yeah, you start off with, there are some cases in here, like the Katharina case, which involves invisibility, and a person essentially disappearing from a public place. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And please, Carol, just speak up when you want to. I'm asking you both about these cases.
Well, Whitley, the thing about Katharina and about the idea of invisibility, and what we mean by that is that during abductions, most, if not practically all of the time, researchers like myself, have come to believe that the UFO is unseeable by any potential witnesses. Abductions could take place in downtown Manhattan or Paris or Chicago, and nobody sees the craft. No one also sees the aliens coming down a beam of light or whatever and entering a building, and no one sees the abductees being lifted back up into the craft. The only exception being, of course, the Linda Cortila case, which was deliberately staged so the maximum number of people would see it. But we've always...
Now, when you say deliberately staged so the maximum number of people would see it, that's quite a statement. Why do you say that?
Well, because, that's to get into that case, which is complicated.
Go ahead. That's all right. We can get into it a little bit.
But the basic point here was a procession of cars with diplomats aboard heading down South Street on the east side of Manhattan in 1989 and at the end of November. And this was right at the time international politics were absolutely aboil. The Berlin Wall was about to come down. There was a general strike in Czechoslovakia. Poland was falling apart. The Russian Empire, so to speak, was falling apart, and there were meetings and chaos at the United Nations, and this group of important people were driving down at 3 in the morning, down South Street, heading towards the ferry terminal so that they could be taken to Governor's Island, where they would take helicopters to another international meeting, highly placed people in these cars, and all of those cars were stopped, apparently by the UFO interference with their electrical systems. And when they were stopped, as if the audience had been put in its seats, then, and only then, the UFO above the nearby apartment building turned on all of its lights in full view of this procession of extremely important international figures. And Linda Cortila was floated out a 12-story window in full view of everybody, along with the aliens. And the story goes on from there. But essentially, it was as if the UFO occupants were making a demonstration. They could have done all this in complete darkness and invisibility. And in fact, nobody saw Linda Cortila being returned to her apartment at the end of the abduction. So you have to assume that this is a deliberate act. I may be wrong there, but all the evidence suggests it was. But my point is that invisibility, as it seems to have been from the beginning, an aspect of the abduction phenomenon, or the abduction technology, one might say.
Yes.
The only way these abductions can take place, and I mean, I had somebody taken off a balcony of a hotel in daytime in Beverly Hills. Somebody was taken out of the 22nd story window of a building next door to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I mean, these things can't happen without witnesses.
Now, tell us a little bit about those two cases. They both sound absolutely fascinating. Well,
the case that happened in New York City, a resident of what is called the Museum Tower, the building next to the Museum of Modern Art.
Right, a very lovely building, I might add.
Yeah, she woke up and the room was filled with light, and she couldn't move, and her husband was not there next to her.
Where he should have been.
She was floated out the window, ultimately, and she found that he had been floated out the window, too, into a craft that was hovering, let's say, 10 feet outside the window of the 22nd floor. Now, if there was anybody walking anywhere around or looking out of the window of a neighboring building, they would have seen this happen. This was, let's say, 2 or 3 in the morning, but there are lots of people up. And these sorts of things happen all the time. In my book, I go into a case where 2 little girls were abducted from their house in Queens. This was a row house, and they remember some little odd bits that suggest the abduction consciously. And one little girl decided it's time to go home. They'd been playing in the basement where they always played, where her friend had her toys and so forth. And when they went outside, she started home. There were police outside and neighbors and all kinds of people standing around, along with her friend's, the other little girl's mother, wailing and crying because the kids had disappeared. And everyone was totally shocked. Where have you been? And of course, they said, we've been in the basement. And the police and everyone else apparently searched the whole building, and the neighborhood was being searched, and the mothers were calling out for the children and so forth. So this all took place in the afternoon, and nobody saw them being taken out or put back. So,
my God.
And when you get into this, invisibility seems to be essential. And yet what happened for me, Whitley, was from the beginning, when we began to suspect this.
But we need to take just a little break here. This is Whitley Strieber at Streamland. We'll be right back. Bud Hopkins and Carol Rainey, Sight Unseen, very simply one of the best, the most convincing, the most complete, the most amazing books about abduction that you have ever read. When you read this and realize that science just rejects the whole thing out of hand, you'll understand something. Somebody out there is crazy, and it's not Bud Hopkins, and it's not Carol Rainey, and it's not the people this is happening to. The scientific community has dropped the ball big time. Sight Unseen. Don't miss it. Get it from the unknowncountry.com store. Get it today. Find out for yourself what's really going on here. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Bud Hopkins and Carol Rainey. You need to learn more about Bud Hopkins and his work. Go to the Intruders Foundation website. That's intrudersfoundation.org. And you can begin to explore the work of an extraordinary man, a real pioneer. We were talking about invisibility. What would be some of the possible technologies that might be behind this?
Well, of course, we don't really know, but what we began to explore, what Carol began to explore, actually, was what was happening in various laboratories, and I would hand it over to her at this point.
In the military especially, but let me just speak briefly about the easiest way to become invisible is to work with the fact that in the electromagnetic spectrum, which are all of the waves of energy from microwaves, radio, infrared, X-rays, they're energy waves that make up the entire electromagnetic spectrum in the universe, we think, and that human beings can only see a tiny little range, a little spectrum in the visible spectrum. And craft could, for example, UFOs could take advantage of the fact that we have such a narrow range that we only see the tip of the iceberg or hear the tip of the iceberg of what's around us. The craft, and it's too long to go into, but it's related to the craft propulsion system as a possibility, that it emits radiation at an energy level that's too high or too low for human perception. And a commonly known aspect of that is a dog whistle, because it emits a sound that's far too high pitched for human beings to hear. So we invent all of these instruments in order to be able to deal with X-rays and gamma rays and radio waves, which are also part of television. That's just a really basic way that a craft could work within the limits of what we can see and hear. But then as you get into the actual technologies that are being developed, the military is always will be one that goes for the high-end technologies first, and they're working on stealth technologies that involve everything from getting the cross-section of a plane down to the size of a bird, right, in terms of what it shows up on in the radar. And then there are sensor and display systems that NASA is working on that basically have little tiny cameras, let's say, on one side of a moving craft. And that would send electrical signals onto the front side of the craft, which would basically be like a large screen projection. So you could have a craft or a tank moving through an environment. Oops, sorry, my cat, noisy. The tank would be moving through an environment. It would be reflecting on its front side the environment it's passing through. So if it's moving through clouds, you'd see clouds in place of the actual object.
All kinds of technologies, in other words, that we're going toward that somebody who was proficient with could use to their own great advantage. But, I have to tell you, by the way, I just was so disturbed by, I guess I've been disturbed since the Linda Cortelli case, because anyone who's had close encounter experiences wants to be in places where they don't happen. And when you're telling me about people being floated out of the windows of the 22nd floor in Manhattan, it just seems like there's no place that you can be safe from this. And I have to ask, is there any place, Bud or Carol, either one of you, where this would be unlikely to happen or less likely to happen?
Well, I actually can't think of any, to tell you the truth. And
that's too bad.
Discarding, unfortunately.
Yes.
Would that there were such places, that I don't know about them. Whitley, I've had one woman I worked with has been abducted. I worked with her for a number of years, and we've looked into experiences that occurred in about 4 different locations in Ohio, and 2 different locations in West Virginia, and 3 or 4 different locations in Washington, D.C., and at least 3 different locations in New York City, and 1 location in Brazil, and at least 2 locations in Spain. So it doesn't seem that there's any getting away from it.
Well, that's a shame because I feel like I've been personally wanting to move again. I've moved, I think, since it happened to me about 10 times, and I'm getting ready to go again. And maybe it's just a useless gesture. I don't know.
Well, my advice is always to move if you really want to make the move to live in a new place, or you're tired of the old place or something, but not to move because you assume it will somehow make you less findable. I think that to make moves or change careers or change relationships to someone because of some perceived sense of what it may or may not do to help you with the alien phenomenon, I think that's not a sufficient reason to make these dramatic moves. But no reason not to move if you really are tired of where you are.
In my own personal case, I'll try
anyway. Yeah, exactly.
Anyway.
Attracted to a new place.
Carol, I would like to know a little bit about your odyssey because you have suddenly come to this and you are taking it seriously, and yet the background that your work suggests would make me think that you would be among the people who would sort of initially dismiss this as being a bunch of confusion and illusions and so forth.
Well, I would have thought so too. And I was doing doctoral work in future studies, so maybe that indicates I had an open mind. I was actually applying for the L5 Society back in the early 80s to go live on the moon, but I had not ever heard of unidentified flying objects. I just seriously hadn't. When you live in an academic world, that does not come across your desk. And then went on to work in quite a bit of medical and scientific documentaries. I just began talking to Bud, 8 years ago when we met, and I was shocked and yet intrigued. And it's always about keeping your mind open enough to go to do the homework and then decide what you think. Just check your ego at the door.
Right.
And
that's crucial. Carol, speaking of checking our egos, we're both going to have to do it because we have to take a little bit of a break.
Right.
This is Whitley Strieber. You can learn more about the work of Carol Rainey and Bud Hopkins by getting Sight Unseen from the unknowncountry.com store. The best place on the internet to get this book. Lower price than Amazon.com, so don't miss this great deal. Sight Unseen, one of the very best books ever written about the abduction experience. A big hardcover, fascinating, remarkable, incredible cases that will open your mind, just as Carol says we all need so badly. Let's open our mind to Carol Rainey and Bud Hopkins. Go to unknowncountry.com. Visit it every day. There's new news of the edge there every single day. Don't miss a day of unknowncountry.com. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. Bud Hopkins and Carol Rainey, Sight Unseen. Very simply, one of the best, the most convincing, the most complete, the most amazing books about abduction that you have ever read. When you read this and realize that science just rejects the whole thing out of hand, you'll understand something. Somebody out there is crazy, and it's not Bud Hopkins, and it's not Carol Rainey, and it's not the people this is happening to. The scientific community has dropped the ball big time. Sight Unseen. Don't miss it. Get it from the unknowncountry.com store. Get it today. Find out for yourself what's really going on here. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Carol Rainey, Bud Hopkins, Sight Unseen, Science, UFO, Invisibility, and Transgenic Beings. A huge title for a truly remarkable book, a journey into the abduction experience, unlike anything you've ever read before. Bud has written some incredible and powerful books, and this is right up there with the very most powerful of them all. And now, Carol, we were just talking before we left the air about the experience of kind of coming to this. And one of the things that is suggested at times in the book is about the control of abductees by their experience, and even their being completely taken over. And I was just thinking to myself, could it be the other way around? Maybe the abductees are the ones who are not under control because we can see something of what's happening to us, and the rest of the society is in some sort of induced state of denial, because how can anybody deny this? And yet they do routinely. They just ignore it.
Well, I would tend to think, though, that that's the denial is more in any part of the human nature, aided and abetted by a government cover-up, and the ridicule factor. I don't know that the aliens are controlling people's denial. I don't know if that's what you meant.
Well, I might, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm just speculating. I'm just asking what you think about it.
I have no idea how that happens, but I know that one of the ideas that got us one of the incidents that got us to think about doing this book was an example of co-option, if you will, or taking a mind control that actually happens in nature. I don't know if you have time for me to tell that story of the wasp.
Sure, please. That's what we're here for.
Our friend Ann Cuvelier handed us this article from a New York Times science section, and we had been speaking earlier that day about Bud's idea that aliens sometimes seem to be able to take over or co-opt the human unwillingly into doing work for them. And nobody knows how that would happen. But here's how it happens in the rainforest in Costa Rica. There's a parasitic wasp that preys on the orb-weaving spider.
Get ready for this, folks. And this is an incredible story.
It's named the orb-weaving spider because it spins a perfectly round web. But what this wasp does is it attacks the spider, temporarily paralyzes it, lays an egg on the tip of the spider's abdomen. And, of course, the spider can't reach that, so when it goes back to doing its daily web spinning, the larva of the wasp clings to its belly and just slowly sucks the life out of the spider. But the night before the spider then the wasp takes the spider's life, it somehow redirects the spider to build a totally different sort of structure. Instead of spinning its round web, the wasp, and they think it's by some chemical process that the wasp injects into the spider's brain, the spider begins weaving this thick lateral cable, which, when the spider is then dead, the wasp climbs out of its larva and it builds its nest in the thick lateral weavings that the spider has created exactly for it up in the treetops before it dies.
And that just to finish that, this, of course, the reason this is done is so the larva is protected from all of its predators. It's up in the air. And what happens, the other interesting thing is when this was being replicated in the laboratory with spiders and wasps that was brought in, and they took the larva, away from the orb of the spider just before it dies. The spider recovers and goes back to its normal activity of spinning round webs again. It's as if it's been sort of taken over and controlled, although we don't know how. And the analogy, of course, here is with something that's been widely reported, in that we have abductees who find themselves aboard a craft and aiding and abetting the UFO occupants by calming down other abductees, and even find themselves dressed in a kind of a tight blue jumpsuit as if they're part of the alien crew. And when this is all over, they remember this sometimes, and sometimes in great detail, and feel incredible remorse that they have participated in the abduction of a fellow human being. So we know that from at least case reports that this happens in the alien phenomenon, and when we discovered this spider thing, we found a kind of a small-scale analogy, but one which is in its own way just as mysterious.
But one which does suggest that there could be something as simple as a drug that could be used to...
We have no way of knowing.
No way of knowing. But now, tell us about the case. I'm trying to remember it from the book of the lady who came back with and reported under hypnosis the knowledge of undersea creatures and so forth. And
well, that's actually the Linda Cortila case.
That is the Linda Cortila case.
When she was abducted, along with several of these extremely important political figures, as if the aliens were trying to teach them a lesson about their goals, whether these lessons are truthful or not. I mean, whether their goals are being accurately stated. Linda was taken to a seashore. This is late at night, and there were these three distinguished people, a diplomat and two high security people, sitting on the sand. And she walked up to them and started berating them for their treatment of the environment, and she picked up a dead bluefish or something on the beach, which she said she doesn't even like to touch the fish with the fillet in her own kitchen. And she waved this at them and said, "See what you've done." And she seemed to know the names of various minerals and the components of the sand there. And when all this was over, of course, she was back to being Linda again, having no idea how she knew all of this about the various elements that made up the quality of the sand. And she couldn't understand why she was berating her fellow human beings when she should have been on their side rather than the alien side. So she felt really kind of embarrassed about her behavior. So here we have again something where she recognized in herself that she possessed knowledge that she was not aware of, and that she was behaving in ways that she was ashamed of later.
And, you know, this aspect of the experience, it suggests, I mean, it worries me, of course, because I had an implant put in my left ear, which I remember having done, and there was an attempt made to remove it, and it moved on its own power out from under the surgeon's scalpel, and he concluded the surgery because he did not know what to make of it. It wasn't, he had been led to believe that it was a cyst, and when he saw this white disc-shaped object that actually moved away from his scalpel under its own power, he immediately closed the wound because he wasn't satisfied that he knew what he was doing anymore. Mm-hmm. And so it's still there. Mm-hmm. And it's very disturbing, of course, to someone in the public eye because, you know, I would hate to be a shill, basically, for evil aliens, and it's why I've tried to be careful to extend in my radio program, especially interviews beyond the limits of, you know, people who think they had terrific and wonderful experiences, which I did at first until I remembered more. It took me 10, 15 years to remember, but
I'd like to stop there for a second and put the idea of implants and being trained to cooperate into a context that is very much like that of how human researchers use primates in laboratories.
Okay, we're gonna do that, right, but we're gonna do it in just a couple minutes because we're going to take a little bitty break right here. This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. We'll be right back. Bud Hopkins and Carol Rainey, Sight Unseen, very simply one of the best, the most convincing, the most complete, the most amazing books about abduction that you have ever read. When you read this and realize that science just rejects the whole thing out of hand, you'll understand something. Somebody out there is crazy, and it's not Bud Hopkins, and it's not Carol Rainey, and it's not the people this is happening to. The scientific community has dropped the ball big time. Sight Unseen. Don't miss it. Get it from the unknowncountry.com store. Get it today. Find out for yourself what's really going on here. This is Dreamland with Whitley Strieber. We're back talking to Bud Hopkins and Carol Rainey. Their book, Sight Unseen, Science, UFO, Invisibility, and Transgenic beings, their website, intrudersfoundation.org. Do you think there's anything in this? Get into it, because there really is. Abductions are real. Something is happening, and we need to understand it and be aware of it. Bud Hopkins has said many times, extraordinary experiences demand an extraordinary response from the rest of us, and science is not responding to this in the right way, with the result that who or whatever's out there has a completely free rein. They can do whatever they want to us because we remain passive. Don't you remain passive. Go to the Intruders Foundation. Get this book. Get involved. Okay, Carol, before we left the air, we were talking about beginning to talk about this idea of implants and co-opting and control. Mm-hmm. It's terribly important. Let's continue with that.
Well, what I've done in Sight Unseen, as often as I can, is to pull some parallels between what is happening in the UFO world, or those experiences, and make those analogous to things that are happening in the world of science. And one of the aspects that I found that quite startled me, I'm in Bud's house. I have these people come in and out of our house day and night, and I hear the patterns. And here's what happened in May of 1997. There was a convention called UPREN, EUPREN, which was a meeting of scientists who work with non-human primates, the great apes and monkeys. And these animals are often used as models for human experimentation, because they're so close to humans' DNA, and neurologically they're very similar. So our scientists are using them, and if it is conceivable that aliens are using us for similar purposes, experimentation, trying to find out about our neurology, or maybe even something about themselves. Here are some of the patterns that were put forward by this group of scientists in how to handle non-human primates, the great apes. And you'll find that they're eerily similar to UFO abduction reports. The scientists in their protocols set up, it's best to study the behavior of a species in its natural habitat. In other words, leave us here, going about our lives, breeding, having our society, and study us that way, because captivity causes stress, and that skews the data. Another one of the protocols that scientists would use for great apes is to reuse the animal over and over again, treating them with great care. You don't want to wipe out an animal that you have a great deal of time and money invested in. So you're careful of it, so that you can continue to use it. Another protocol would be training the animal to cooperate with experimental procedures, because that leads to less stress and more accurate measurements. I'll just give you one more. In implanting technologies inside the research animals. And that's considered to have revolutionized the collection of physiological data from the experimental apes.
And when you combine that with the advances in nanotechnology, and you extend it out, say, a few hundred years or even less, you have a situation where these beings could be injecting people with extraordinarily sophisticated technologies, and you have to think that the kind of implants that people like Dr. Roger Lear pop out of folks are actually old technology that's been abandoned. Right. Although his last implant, interestingly enough, was found to be broadcasting on 2 different FM bands, which was pretty awesome. FM frequencies, excuse me. So,
no, I think without a doubt, we can already develop implantable devices that allow remote monitoring of the being that it's in.
One of the things, Whitley, about implants is that when we first started thinking about this and dealing with it, I believe Ray Fowler was the first to mention such a thing in the Betty Andreasen case, where she remembered a small ball being inserted in the nostril, which
right.
of course has been replicated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times since then. But the point is that the thinking that we had at the time was, of course, very anthropomorphic and out of our current technology. So we, since we're so busy putting transmitters on to the ears of
right.
polar bears and so forth, our cat, we have to apologize for, but he's just saying he's a member of the family.
Bud and Carol have a resident alien. It's actually not a cat. We'll let him go ahead and pretend.
All right.
It's an orb-weaving cat.
Right.
But at any rate, we thought that since we were putting, little transmitters on animals and setting them free, that must be what this is, a kind of a locator. And, of course, when you really think about it, it's highly possible that every single human being emits a certain electronic signal of some sort, which would make them easily identifiable. I'm theorizing here, but that implants may have all kinds of functions which we have not yet been able even to.
We're going to talk about implants in more detail in just a minute. This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. We'll be back with Bud Hopkins and Carol Rainey. Get their book Sight Unseen from the unknowncountry.com store. Bud Hopkins and Carol Rainey, Sight Unseen, very simply one of the best, the most convincing, the most complete, the most amazing books about abduction that you have ever read. When you read this and realize that science just rejects the whole thing out of hand, you'll understand something. Somebody out there is crazy, and it's not Bud Hopkins, and it's not Carol Rainey, and it's not the people this is happening to. The scientific community has dropped the ball big time. Sight Unseen. Don't miss it. Get it from the unknowncountry.com store. Get it today. Find out for yourself what's really going on here. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland, bringing you the news from unknowncountry.com. Unknowncountry.com, daily news of the edge. You can't get it anywhere else. Now here's unknowncountry.com news editor Ann Strieber.
This week, we reported that spontaneous fires have broken out in a village in Italy, and no one can figure out what's causing them. It can't be electricity since the power has been cut off. Washing machines, dishwashers, refrigerators, electricity meters, and cables have been spontaneously bursting into flames, and there's no evidence of arson. Keep checking our website for a solution to that mystery. What will we do if ET contacts us? An international agreement called the Declaration of Principles Concerning Activities Following the Detection of Extraterrestrial Intelligence lays out the basic rules for contact. The scientists who signed the declaration must agree to keep the news about contact secret until the government has been alerted. As soon as SETI detects a radio signal from aliens, the International Telecommunications Union will ask governments around the world to stop using that part of the radio band so communication can be established. The newspaper in Darwin, Australia had a classified ad that read, "In 1972, I saw a UFO at 5 a.m. over Darwin Airport with 3 other gentlemen. After 31 years, I would like to make contact again with the other witnesses. 2 were security guards from the Darwin Airport. The other was Fred, whose father was the caretaker at the Darwin German Club. Please contact me." Rodney Jarvis, who wants to contact the other witnesses, says the UFO he saw was a very large orange light moving very slowly, just above the tops of the houses. Almost every culture has legends of wise men coming from far off, bringing technology with them. Popular Dreamland guest William Henry often talks about this. Now researchers have found evidence of this at Stonehenge. DNA tests on the skeleton of the man known as the Amesbury Archer, who was buried nearby, reveal he wasn't English, but came from either Switzerland, Austria, or Germany. Archaeologists think he brought the knowledge necessary to build Stonehenge with him. What's especially interesting is that Otzi, the 5,000-year-old Iceman whose body was found in melting ice in the Alps a few years ago, probably came from the same culture. This was a highly developed prehistoric society that has been completely lost in time.
This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. Crop circles, whatever they are, their beauty lifts the spirit. And now you can experience this beauty every day of your life with our new 2004 Crop Circle calendar. Every month brings you another miraculous image and also information about the circle depicted and some words of wisdom from the great writings of the ages. Now, get $2 off this unknowncountry.com exclusive, but you have to hurry because supplies are limited. Go to unknowncountry.com and click on that store tab now. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. Now let's get back to Bud Hopkins and Carol Waney. Bud, we were just talking about implants. Let's get back to that. That's a fascinating subject.
There might be a quality of human being which we are as yet unaware of, something we possess. Just as in the, let's say the 12th century, blood was blood, and nobody knew that certain people had a blood type different than other people. So if you were looking for type O negative in 1206, nobody would know what you're talking about.
Right.
So we may have some qualities that we are yet unaware of, and that the implants are monitoring those as yet totally unknown qualities. So we have no idea what they're doing.
Which might explain also why certain people are abducted and others aren't, although
exactly.
It seems like they're looking for people who are easy to control.
There's a chicken and the egg problem here with that, because, you might say that if you find, one thing you do find amongst abductees very often is problems around the issue of anger, either the inability to express anger or an inappropriate expression of anger with no particular cause. And I would imagine that if you and I'm making some jump here, if you did a study of adult men who had been sexually abused by the Roman Catholic clergy, say, you may find that they're gentle people. There's a sort of shyness. There might be problems with anger, but it might be a psychological profile not very different than abductees.
And so you're saying that it's that it could be that the profile is stress related, and it has to do with a response to a hidden trauma or a buried
Yes, exactly. That's where I said the chicken and the egg situation. That the psychological profile may be due to having shared the same kinds of experiences rather than being innately the same kind of person.
Well, it took me 17 years to finally get to what actually happened to me on the night I was abducted because of the trauma involved and the humiliation. 17 years, and I finally have gotten past it and been able to actually talk about it on this radio program, and which was a huge, huge thing for me. And I'm still scarred. I don't think I'll ever not be scarred. I think that all abductees are scarred. And I want to get back to the question of what is happening. In other words, it seems to me hard to believe that it would be like something like a scientific study. It seems more like they're taking something from us. Are they experimenting on us, or is there something being harvested from us on a regular basis?
Well, Whitley, it's a good question. Of course, it has to be picked up by the human end. We really don't know the alien mind or agenda or so on, except to the extent that we can infer it from what seems to be happening to human beings. And David Jacobs has long ago said that this is not an experiment. It's gone on too long with too much intensity. It seems to me more a process that is understood. And as far as I'm concerned, the one thing we can say absolutely about what is happening is that it has this reproductive center. In other words, sperm and ova samples are taken. There are these what seems to be an attempt to create a mix of human and alien characteristics, what I called originally hybrids, but is not technically correct. As Carol has pointed out, this is a kind of genetic engineering situation, and these are transgenic beings that are being created. Now, that seems to be what's definitely going on, and there seems to be an interest in perhaps what the mix might be of, let's say, human being number 6,382 and alien number 400 and whatever, as if the creation of these mixed creatures is maybe does have an experimental edge to it. But the basic question we have to face is, why are they creating all of these mixes? What are these people going to do? And I say people, but what's the ultimate purpose? Are they going to simply hop in their spaceships and leave and populate Mars or something, or are they going to infiltrate? Are they going to take over? Are they going to change us? I mean, there's no way of knowing. We don't have any idea about that. But the reproductive focus is certainly the one thing that's concrete that we can say for sure.
It's so unbelievably horrible, and yet there seems to be on the government's side a substantial amount of knowledge, but no action. And Bud, you've God knows where you've been over the years trying to get help. What is your impression of why it remains sitting on its hands? Is it being coerced, or is it just unable to protect us and not willing to admit that, or what's going on in your feeling?
Well, of course, we don't know for sure, but I think the latter suggestion you just made is probably closer to the truth, but that's just a guess on my part. What I've always said, rather humorously, but seriously too, is that if all the president can say is that they're here, my fellow Americans, they can now fly us, they can do whatever they want to do, they're abducting systematically our men, women, and children on a regular basis, they are carrying out intrusive procedures, et cetera, et cetera. There's no communication between us, we don't know how this is going to turn out, they can now fly anything we have, but we don't know whether they're going to turn out to be friendly or not. We'll let you know when we hear more. Thank you and good night. And I always said at that point I would rather be in the liquor business than the bond market.
Right. Yeah. You can certainly see why they would not be willing to say that. We're coming up toward the end of the show, and Bud, and Carol, before we go, I want to change. One of the most extraordinary stories in this extraordinary book is the elusive Mr. Page. And if we can do it in about 3 minutes, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about Anne-Marie and Mr. Page.
Carol, why don't you go into that a little bit?
Well, I think that's your story. I'll talk about any science, but you tell the story.
Well, essentially, the woman, Anne-Marie, who I wrote about, is an abductee who had come to me a number of years ago, and in amongst the various experiences she was telling me, she finally brought up the fact that there was a very strange man named Mr. Page who came to live with her family when she was a very little girl. And this man was extremely strange. He had no visible means of support, no identification, no money, and he wanted to live with them and live in the basement where there wasn't even any running water, at least anywhere near him. They had no idea of any connection that this man had with the real world. He looked peculiar, and he developed this intense connection with Anne-Marie from the age of about 3. And her mother has said to me, I can't understand how I ever let Mr. Page just simply take my little girl off almost daily for these walks down into a woods where there was a cow pasture and so forth. And Anne-Marie could never remember exactly what happened when they went down there. But the whole experience was extremely eerie, and yet she felt very attached to this man. And the man would send her postcards. He would simply disappear and say he's going away. He would send her a letter, and interspersed in the letter were symbols, which are the kinds of symbols which many abductees have reported seeing inside the craft. She didn't know what they meant at the time, although she has subsequently come up with some of the same symbols. Mm-hmm. He was sending her telepathic messages, and she was receiving them and dealing with him when he was away. The man, when he was asked where he came from, he would simply point straight up and say, I came from up north, pointing to the sky. The implication is that somehow or other he was mediating between the aliens and her and was not himself fully human.
In other words, the very kind of transgenic being that we've been talking about more or less throughout the show, which is just so weird. And I guess it was Carl Sagan, wasn't it, who said that if we really did have encounters with aliens, it would be strange beyond the strangest thing we could possibly imagine.
Absolutely, and it is.
Once that turns out to be true, then the skeptics community says, well, basically it's too strange. People must be dreaming it up. Well, it's been a real pleasure having the two of you. The book Sight Unseen, get it from the unknowncountry.com store. We'll be right back. Crop circles, whatever they are, their beauty lifts the spirit. And now you can experience this beauty every day of your life with our new 2004 Crop Circle calendar. Every month brings you another miraculous image and also information about the circle depicted and some words of wisdom from the great writings of the ages. Now, get $2 off this unknowncountry.com exclusive, but you have to hurry because supplies are limited. Go to unknowncountry.com and click on that store tab now. But this is Whitley Strieber. We are talking to Dave Louthan. A few days ago, there was an extraordinary story, in fact, a riveting story in the New York Times to the effect that the man who had been involved in the slaughter of the Downer cow that was said by government to have had mad cow disease was speaking out and saying that something was very, very wrong with the government's claims. Mad cows aren't downers, he said. They're up and they're crazy. Dave, why don't you just tell us, and thank you very much for coming on the program.
Sure.
What exactly happened to inspire you to suddenly speak out?
Well, I'll tell you exactly what happened. And it went like this. Okay?
Yeah.
That cow came in, good walking cow. I remember the cow very well. We don't get that many good walking cows over at Vern's. You know, we do downer cows. We do really sick, really tore up cows. They're generally a mess. But this cow was up. Kind of a nice cow. Whenever we do get a nice cow, I go, hey, a nice cow. I asked the driver who it belonged to. He said Sonny Dean's cow. Sonny Dean usually sends us pretty good stuff. So, she was a walking cow. She was in with a bunch of down cows. I think she was the only one up on the trailer, in fact. So I killed a down cow. There was a crippled cow after that cow, and then got to this walking cow. Now this cow was a little agitated in this trailer. When I first saw it, it looked all right. It was kind of kind-eyed, looked all right, but the driver was kind of poking at it with a hot shot. He wanted it to get off his trailer, and it wasn't going to make that step down. It was going to turn around, run back over him, and trample them down cows back in there because it was going to go anywhere but out of the trailer. It didn't want to come out. It saw what was going on. It was wise to us.
Yeah.
So I asked the vet, have you seen enough of this cow? He says, yeah, I guess I've seen it. He knew I was going to shoot it out of turn, but usually we do all the downers first, and then we'll do the walkers. So I shot this cow out of turn just to save us all a lot of trouble. Went on into the building, didn't think nothing about it. 2 weeks later, it comes back positive for BSE. I said, which cow was it? They wouldn't tell me. The USDA was being hush-mouthed about it. Which cow was it? Couldn't find out. I kept working on the inspector, and finally the inspector said, well, it was a Sonny Dean cow. And as soon as he said it was a Sonny Dean cow, I knew exactly which cow he was talking about. I ran up to the office. I looked at the paperwork, the kill sheet from that day. Third cow down. It was the third cow off that trailer. And I went, bam, I knew it was that cow. So I was back, and we were killing a lot of cows that day. It was, this is December 26th now, that I actually found out which cow it was. So I went back there. I'm killing cows while an inspector comes out and says, we're not going to kill any more downers. USDA says, no more downers. I said, why? They said, well, if we don't kill any more downers, that we're not going to get any more mad cows. I said, that's crap. This cow wasn't even a downer. First of all, mad cows are not downers. They're up. They're wild. They run around. That's why they call them mad cows, because they're up smashing the place up.
Right.
If they were laying there being calm, they'd call them calm cows, but they're not. They're mad cows. So I said, in the second he told me that the USDA said we're not going to kill any more downers, and that's going to take care of the problem, my whole life flashed before my eyes, and I'm not kidding. My heart was pounding, my face turned red, my ears were burning, because I knew exactly what happened. They had just, by saying they're not going to kill any more downers, what they did was stop all the testing, because we were only testing downers. Same with the few places that were testing, and we all just started in October. The USDA said, well, we've had this testing program in place for years, which they did have it in place for years, but they didn't use it. They never took it.
Right.
We just started in October. We tested 83 cows. This is like the 83rd cow or something that we tested, and we found one that fast, and I was blown away.
Now, why did they start in October?
I have no idea why they started in October.
They must have had some inkling that something was going on. Maybe there's other mad cows, the presence of which they've hidden.
I think they thought maybe they had stalled on that program as long as they could have. But we had been taking in a cow here and a cow there that had the shaky head, the weird behavior and all this, and we point these out to the vet, and they were starting to be more common.
Yeah.
We'd say, hey, this cow's acting funny, and he would say, well, it's probably got a neck injury or whatnot. So we'd kill him. The USDA would take the brains, and I'd never hear anything about it. And then I think the only reason that we heard about this particular cow is from what the inspector told me was the guy, one of the technicians at the lab in Iowa leaked it to the press, and I believe that's the only reason why we found out this one was a mad cow.
So what you're saying then is that the public would never have even known about this.
Plus, if I would have run that cow around under the roof instead of taking it in with the downers, it wouldn't have got tested. We were only testing downers, but because I killed that cow outside the back door there, that technically made it a suspect, and I tested it because they gave us $10 a sample. Which is a pretty good deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me read you the first paragraph of a story that appeared on the AP Wire about an hour ago.
Okay.
The Agriculture Department said Monday it is ending its search for additional cases of mad cow disease, even though officials have not found all the animals they sought after the nation's first case.
They can't find them. Those Holsteins are black and white, and they all look pretty much the same. I could recognize one cow from another, because I got an eye for cows and I've been around them. But these USDA guys are out of college and they don't know one cow from another. By now, everybody that's got one of those cows has run out in their pasture and cut their ear tags off so they can't be found. They don't want the stigma of having a mad cow in their dairy. They don't want anybody to know. So they've run out there, they've torn up the paperwork, they've cut the ear tags off them cows, and they're lost forever.
So, in other words, what you're saying is that the United States is no longer able to tell whether or not.
No, those are completely mixed in. It's like picking a jelly bean out of a jar. They all look the same. Those cows are lost forever.
What happens to us, the public?
Well, you got two choices. You got two choices. You can pretend nothing's happening, keep eating your meat, and get sick and die, or you can stop buying meat. The only way to fix this is if you stop buying meat. If you got meat in your mouth right now, spit it out. Stop buying meat. The only way, because I've been after these people day and night for 40-some-odd days, and they just stand there. Their feet are stuck in the mud. They are not going to test because they cannot afford to find another mad cow. One mad cow is a mad cow scare. You get two mad cows, that's an epidemic. That's a panic. And what they mean by panic, they don't mean people running in the street. They mean people are going to stop buying meat. Big beef is going to lose a lot of money, so they would rather kill you and make profits than to actually take care of this problem. So if you stop buying meat, I'll guarantee you within a week they're going to be testing every cow. And I'm not talking about testing 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000. Don't buy a piece of meat until they're testing every cow. If that package doesn't say this meat has been tested, don't eat it. It's bad.
Wow, in Japan they test every cow slaughtered.
That's a fact. Right now, the only piece of meat I would dare eat would be a Japanese beef. I just talked to a Japanese news crew. They're coming over here tomorrow or the next day. I said, bring me some meat. I'm starving to death.
Now, what about beef like from New Zealand and places like that? I
don't know. I don't know about that. I haven't heard anything about that down there. I know they got nice cows down there, but I don't know if they're testing down there or not. But
I know that Australia tests a tiny number of its cows.
That's not good enough.
No, it's not.
Because, if you're lucky enough to get the meat that came from that tiny amount that got tested, you're lucky because most of the meat I eat is going to come off a cow that ain't been tested.
Well, thanks very much, Dave. You can hear more from Dave Laughlin on the unknowncountry.com website. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. The work of Linda Moulton Howe, the amazing work of Linda Moulton Howe, the world's greatest reporter of edge news and edge topics. She has got a website, earthfiles.com. Go there frequently. You will never forget what you find on earthfiles.com. The best website, the best reporting of its kind in the world. Linda Moulton Howe, earthfiles.com. Don't miss a single day. My friend William Henry one of the oracles of our age, and now you can get every one of his books for $1 off. These privately published volumes are an unknowncountry.com exclusive, and right now, the price of this incredibly valuable information has never been better. Click on that store tab now, because we cannot allow these prices to last long, and you need William Henry and his information. One reporter who loves mysteries is radio's leading science journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. She's an Emmy Award-winning TV producer and reporter and editor for EarthFiles.com, the Internet's most respected edge science website. Here she is, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. Since the middle of December, residents of Horton and Napoleon, Michigan, west of Ann Arbor, have been seeing some very strange lights and objects in the sky. Another mystery was a large, nearly perfectly round ice circle discovered on December 28th at Mud Lake near Horton. The ice circle was probably created by nature, but a local resident saw a bright light over the lake. As recently as this past weekend, on Saturday, February 7th, and 3 nights before on February 4th, a Jackson, Michigan resident videotaped unidentified objects and sent me copies of the tapes which do show unusual objects in the sky. The man is a professional who works in computer technology support and has asked that I not use his real name. So for this radio update, I will call him John. John is a 36-year-old man who has lived in Jackson, Michigan all his life. He remembers seeing bizarre diamond-shaped, oval-shaped, and triangular-shaped craft and orange lights back in 1992 when there was another UFO flap over Napoleon. But he has not seen any strange aerial lights since then until now. He and other residents from the Napoleon, Horton, Litchfield area of Michigan south of Jackson have repeatedly seen unidentified lights. You can see images and reports about this Michigan phenomenon at my website, www.earthfiles.com. In fact, I have frames from John's most recent February 7th videotape. Just go to the headlines page and click on the top Michigan UFO story. In John's videotape, he was first near the Jackson County Airport and then traveled to a bank in downtown Jackson where he went to an ATM machine for some cash. And here is what happened next.
And when I got near the ATM, I happened to notice that there were 3 curious orange dots in diagonal fashion. If you can think of a line 45 degrees from level ground, they were at that angle. And I stared at it for about 5 seconds because I wanted to see if it was moving, if it was an airplane or something else. And it was just stationary, so I assumed it was glare off of some building or maybe telephone or power wires. And then I just went to use the ATM, which took me less than a minute. And then when I came back out, I looked in that direction again, and the 3 dots had actually moved, but they hadn't moved very far, which it didn't make sense to me, because if it was a plane, then why wasn't it moving in the first place? And why didn't it move very far? It didn't make any sense to me. So I went back to my truck and I grabbed the camcorder again and I started videotaping the object.
And what appeared to be 3 points of light in a line that were orange turned out to do what?
Well, it was odd because the light on the left got really bright, and you can see it in the videotape. And the dot that was in the middle actually was lower, like the bottom of a flat V shape. Mm-hmm. And then the light on the right was small, like the lower dot in the middle. And I videotaped that for a short while this object was crossing the sky, and then I pulled back to get perspective of the building. And I regret that now, because what happened after that is I tried to zoom back in on it and lost it momentarily. And I used my eyes at that point to sight where it was at. so I could have better luck zooming in on it again with the camcorder. And what I noticed then with my eyes is that the object dimmed overall. All three lights seemed to dim. The one that was the brightest on the left dimmed the most, and they all dimmed until they were equal in brightness. And it was sort of like taking a light bulb and decreasing the power to it, so it gets dimmer and dimmer.
Right, like a rheostat.
Yeah, like that. And then it seemed to rise a little, and it continued across the sky, and I managed to reacquire it, and I followed it for a while, and it just looked like three small dots, and I never saw any blinking lights at all, which an airplane should have blinking lights that time of night.
Now, I've seen your videotape, and I'm so glad that you have been trying to capture these anomalies over Napoleon on videotape. And the thing that struck me was something trying to camouflage itself in the sky so that most people would not pay attention.
Yeah, that's the impression I get. It's sort of like they don't want to be that noticeable. But if you seem to take an interest in them, they will be noticeable. And I find it odd that as I would leave my apartment, I would see this light in such a position in the sky where it would be noticeable to me. Because I sent you a picture of what I saw to the right, a daytime picture, when I first sighted the object that ended up over the airport. And you can see there's a section of the sky where, to be noticeable, the object would have to fit in this section of the sky. In other words, there are trees around, there are other objects, you couldn't see it.
Right.
It was just in the right location at the right time for me to see it, and it stayed long enough for me to run into my apartment again and get my camcorder and leave again. And it seemed to be patient enough to wait until I took the longest route through all the stop signs to the airport, and then seemed to wait around for me to park and get my camcorder ready and to start videotaping. And it stuck around for a while, minutes, 7, 8, 9 minutes, and I videotaped it. And it just seems odd to me that I was somehow always in the right place at the right time to lead me to this thing to start videotaping it. And the same thing with the second object over downtown Jackson. The lights that weren't moving, I kind of get the odd feeling that they were parked there waiting to be noticed, and then when I ignored them, used the ATM machine and came back out, then they started moving slowly. It's almost like it was choreographed, not by me, but by whatever intelligence is behind these lights. It's like if you take an interest in them, they will reveal themselves a little bit. That's just my impression.
And why you?
Probably just because I'm curious and I have a camcorder and I look up. I had started paying attention again after the ice circle, after you reported on that and the light associated with it. That's when I bought my camcorder, and I just waited, and it seemed to start with the Northern Hillsdale sighting that I had. That's when all of this seemed to start, and it was only last Wednesday.
And so if you hadn't heard my Earth Files and radio reports on the ice circle in Horton, you wouldn't have gotten the camera and you wouldn't have been looking for these lights.
Right, and Sunday night something else happened that was unusual.
What?
Sunday night, I got the same friend to go out into the Northern Hillsdale and Southern Jackson area. We drove around for, I'd say, an hour and a half, and sometimes we parked, but we didn't see anything. We went back to where he lives in the Horton area, which incidentally is not too far from the ice circle. And as I actually had made the tape at his house that I sent to you. And as I was leaving, I exited his house, and he was right behind me. And the first thing I saw was maybe 200 yards away, over a tree line, there was an orange glowing light. And I immediately said to my friend, just half jokingly, I said, "They're here." And he looked, and he saw the same light. And then I made a move to my left to walk a couple of paces, and I was going to get out my camcorder and start shooting again, and it disappeared. It was just gone. And I think back on it now, and I sort of think that whatever these lights are, they have a sense of humor, because we searched over a wide area for an hour and a half, 2 hours looking for these lights. And then at the exact moment we give up and I'm going home for the night, it's there. And then when I go to get my camcorder, it's gone.
From these ongoing sky mysteries in Napoleon, Michigan, we're going to go to the ground mysteries on Mars right after this break. This is Linda Moulton Howe reporting for Dreamland.
Visit Linda Moulton Howe's phenomenal website, earthfiles.com. Do not miss it. Visit it every day. This is Whitley Strieber. We'll be right back. The work of Linda Moulton Howe, the amazing work of Linda Moulton Howe, the world's greatest reporter of edge news and edge topics. She has got a website, earthfiles.com. Go there frequently. You will never forget what you find on earthfiles.com. The best website, the best reporting of its kind in the world. Linda Moulton Howe, earthfiles.com. Don't miss a single day. Crop circles, whatever they are, their beauty lifts the spirit. And now you can experience this beauty every day of your life with our new 2004 Crop Circle calendar. Every month brings you another miraculous image and also information about the circle depicted and some words of wisdom from the great writings of the ages. Now, get $2 off this unknowncountry.com exclusive, but you have to hurry because supplies are limited. Go to unknowncountry.com and click on that store tab now. My friend William Henry, one of the oracles of our age, and now you can get every one of his books for $1 off. These privately published volumes are an unknowncountry.com exclusive, and right now the price of this incredibly valuable information has never been better. Click on that store tab now because we cannot allow these prices to last long, and you need William Henry and his information. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to Linda Moulton Howe, and now back to Linda's report.
Those rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, have been busy this week on Mars. Opportunity got up close to that bedrock near its landing site and surprised NASA and JPL planetary geologists when its spectrometers showed a very high percentage of sulfur in the rock. Opportunity also had problems even making its wheels move without slipping, because the soil and rocks are covered with small round stones that have yet to be identified. This week, I talked about the implication of so much sulfur and the mysterious round rocks with Dr. Ronald Greeley, Regents Professor of Geology at Arizona State University, who is also one of the 7 main chairmen of the Science Operations Working Group for the Spirit and Opportunity missions.
The measurements that have been made there suggest that there's a very high percentage of sulfur present in the material, and that there are these spherules that had been seen and reported on earlier. Those are still very curious features.
Now, what is the implication of sulfur generally as you look at the picture of Mars?
Well, sulfur is a common component in a lot of environments, but such a high percentage is unusual, and this is what leads some folks to consider the volcanic origin, or at least volcanic processes to be involved.
And what is the percentage of that with white stone now in terms of its sulfur content, and what else is there?
Well, the percentages, I don't believe those data have been released yet, but it's pretty high in comparison to most rocks we're familiar with. The additional findings are there are some minerals that have been identified in the mini-test results that would suggest the presence of a couple of minerals that form, again, in the presence of water. And in particular, if this is a volcanic terrain that we're looking at, for example, the accretionary lapilli idea, then the presence of these minerals might suggest that this was a hydrothermal area, and sulfur is a component of such environments.
And so the bedrock might be, if we were comparing it to the Earth, might have had an origin similar to, say, Yellowstone National Park.
Yes, to some parts of Yellowstone, that's right.
And all this is adding up to a question about whether the place where Opportunity came down originally might have been hot magma coming up to the surface in some kind of volcanic activity, or at least hot springs. Yeah,
the evidence is sort of pointing toward the presence of a hot environment, hot for some reason. That's something that's under debate now. volcanic activity, magma close to the surface is one possibility. The evidence we have so far is very suggestive that water was present. The question that's unanswered at this time is whether the water was a standing lake or a small sea, or if it was diffused throughout the rocks in the subsurface. We don't have the answer to that yet, but the observation of things like the crossbeds and determining what the origin of the spherules might be, those will help answer that question of whether there was open water on the surface or not. And that's a fundamental question we're trying to glean the answer for.
Now, the spherules, or spherical small objects, they are about how big in the bedrock?
They're about 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters across.
And are they all over the slabs of rock?
Boy, they seem to be pretty pervasive, yes. You know, as a matter of fact, the wheels on the rover were sort of slipping as the rover is driving across that surface, and it's sort of like trying to travel over ball bearings. There are so many of them that it makes the traction a little difficult.
Wow, and has anybody ever seen anything quite like this anywhere on the Earth or the Moon?
Well, we have seen spherules of various forms, both on Earth and the Moon, and in some cases they are in similar concentrations. There are some impact craters on Earth that have small spherules that resulted from the impact that melted the rock, and then the melted blobs fell back to the surface and form deposits that are several feet thick of mostly the spherules. In other cases, as was seen on the Moon, there are deposits of volcanic glass that forms little spherules. So these have been seen on Earth and the Moon in comparable quantities, but again, trying to figure out what the origin is for the features we're seeing on Mars is what we're trying to figure out right now.
And is it fair to say that we here on the Earth don't know of any context in which these kinds of sphericals could be formed unless it was in some kind of a heat melt process?
There is another mechanism. I think I mentioned that they could be precipitates. In other words, they could be precipitated from water. Think of it as a little grain of dust within the water, and chemical precipitates like salt and other things would form around that dust grain, and then those would settle down to the surface. So those can also form spherules.
Is it fair at this point to say, as we're speaking on February 11th, that there still is not the smoking gun yet that water like a lake was anywhere the rovers have been so far?
That is correct. There is not definitive evidence for that at either site.
And that's what you're all looking for?
Right.
Communications between NASA and the rovers don't always work well, Dr. Greeley said, and recent commands to Spirit to drive toward another crater called Bonneville have been delayed. But if all goes well, Spirit will be roving in yet another crater soon. So stay tuned. This is Linda Moulton-Howe, reporter and editor of EarthFiles.com, reporting for Dreamland.
Thanks very much, Linda. This is Whitley Strieber. Dreamland will be right back. Bud Hopkins and Carol Rainey, Sight Unseen, very simply one of the best, the most convincing, the most complete, the most amazing books about abduction that you have ever read. When you read this and realize that science just rejects the whole thing out of hand, you'll understand something. Somebody out there is crazy, and it's not Bud Hopkins, and it's not Carol Rainey, and it's not the people this is happening to. The scientific community has dropped the ball big time. Sight Unseen. Don't miss it. Get it from the unknowncountry.com store. Get it today. Find out for yourself what's really going on here. Crop circles, whatever they are, their beauty lifts the spirit. And now you can experience this beauty every day of your life with our new 2004 Crop Circle calendar. Every month brings you another miraculous image and also information about the circle depicted and some words of wisdom from the great writings of the ages. Now, get $2 off this unknowncountry.com exclusive, but you have to hurry because supplies are limited. Go to unknowncountry.com and click on that store tab now. the work of Linda Moulton Howe, the amazing work of Linda Moulton Howe, the world's greatest reporter of edge news and edge topics. She has got a website, earthfiles.com. Go there frequently. You will never forget what you find on earthfiles.com. The best website, the best reporting of its kind in the world. Linda Moulton Howe, earthfiles.com. Don't miss a single day. Well, I certainly hope you've enjoyed Dreamland as much as I did. What a show. First Bud Hopkins, then Linda Howe, interspersed with Dave Louthan, and it is extraordinarily controversial. You can listen to more about Dave Louthan, more from Dave Louthan, on the unknowncountry.com website. Just click on the Listen Now tab, and you'll find a longer interview with Dave at the very bottom of the page. Listeners, or subscribers rather, of course, can always download and keep these extremely important interviews. Don't miss Dave Louthan and take this seriously. I think that we're in a real problem with mad cow in this country, and the government is doing whatever it can to not acknowledge that. And I think it's going to bite us, come back and bite us pretty soon. Next, and another thing, if you look at the evidence that Bud Hopkins presented about close encounters and abductions, and the evidence that Linda presents every week, like she did this week, of videotaped UFO sightings, and then you listen to people like Jill Tarter of SETI saying it's all a bunch of bunk. Where do these people get off? Are they crazy? Are they unable to see the evidence before their eyes? I really have to wonder if we don't have a situation where our scientific community has literally lost it when it comes to the importance of these subjects. The evidence, the physical evidence, implants, etc., is videotape. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. The physical evidence would convince any jury on this planet that something weird is going on, and yet science won't touch it. That, in my opinion, is insane. I don't have any other way to put it. It is insane. The next week, by the way, on Dreamland, what a show we've got. We've got Christopher Knight with us. He is the author of the huge, massive bestseller, The Hiram Key, one of the great interpreters of Masonry and the secrets of the Masons. There is nobody like it. His new book, The Book of Hiram, is going to be very exciting.
Abduction phenomenon, or the abduction technology, one might say.
Yes.
The only way these abductions can take place, and I had somebody taken off a balcony of a hotel in daytime in Beverly Hills. Somebody was taken out of the 22nd story window of a building next door to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. These things can't happen without witnesses.
Now, tell us a little bit about those two cases. They both sound absolutely fascinating.
Well, the case that happened in New York City, a resident of what is called the Museum Tower, the building next to the Museum of Modern Art.
Right, a very lovely building, I might add.
Yeah, she woke up and the room was filled with light, and she couldn't move, and her husband was not there next to her.
Where he should have been.
She was floated out the window, ultimately, and she found that he had been floated out the window, too, into a craft that was hovering, let's say, 10 feet outside the window of the 22nd floor. Now, if there was anybody walking anywhere around or looking out of the window of a neighboring building, they would have seen this happen. This was, let's say, 2 or 3 in the morning, but there are lots of people up. And these sorts of things happen all the time. In my book, I go into a case where 2 little girls were abducted from their house in Queens. This was a row house, and they remember some little odd bits that suggest the abduction consciously, and the one little girl decided it's time to go home. They'd been playing in the basement where they always played, where her friend had her toys and so forth. And when they went outside, she started home. There were police outside and neighbors and all kinds of people standing around, along with her friend's, the other little girl's mother, wailing and crying because the kids had disappeared. And everyone was totally shocked. Where have you been? And of course they said, we've been in the basement. And the police and everyone...
there are so many directions it goes in. Let's talk a little bit about some of the witnesses and some of the things like invisibility that you discuss in the early part of the book. Because a large part of the book is about accepting the reality of the technologies that makes the abduction experience look like magic and look like dreams when it's not.
Right. In a strange way, I think the basic goal summarized of the book was to take the para out of paranormal and to make the distance between normal cutting-edge human technology and alien technology to reduce that margin as much as possible. And I think that's what the book attempted. And with Carol's involvement with cutting-edge science here, I think we're getting close to that idea.
Well, yeah, you start off with, there are some cases in here, like the Katharina case, which involves invisibility, and a person essentially disappearing from a public place. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And please, Carol, just speak up when you want to. I'm asking you both about these cases.
Well, Whitley, the thing about Katharina and about the idea of invisibility and what we mean by that is that during abductions, most, if not practically all of the time, researchers have come, like myself, have come to believe that the UFO is unseeable by any potential witnesses. Abductions could take place in downtown Manhattan or Paris or Chicago, and nobody sees the craft. No one also sees the aliens coming down a beam of light or whatever and entering a building, and no one sees the abductees being lifted back up into the craft. The only exception being, of course, the Linda Cortila case, which was deliberately staged so that Maxim Niles apparently searched the whole building, and the neighborhood was being searched, and the mothers were calling out for the children and so forth. So this all took place in the afternoon, and nobody saw them being taken out or put back. So,
my God.
And when you get into this, invisibility seems to be essential. And yet, what happened for me, Whitley, was from the beginning when we began to suspect this.
But we need to take just a little break here. This is Whitley Strieber at Streamland. We'll be right back. Bud Hopkins and Carol Rainey, Sight Unseen, very simply one of the best, the most convincing, the most complete, the most amazing books about abduction that you have ever read. When you read this and realize that science just rejects the whole thing out of hand, you'll understand something. Somebody out there is crazy, and it's not Bud Hopkins, and it's not Carol Rainey, and it's not the people this is happening to. The scientific community has dropped the ball big time. Sight Unseen. Don't miss it. Get it from the unknowncountry.com store. Get it today. Find out for yourself what's really going on here. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Bud Hopkins and Carol Rainey. You need to learn more about Bud Hopkins and his work. Go to the Intruders Foundation website. That's intrudersfoundation.org. And you can begin to explore the work of an extraordinary man, a real pioneer. We were talking about invisibility. What would be some of the possible technologies that might be behind this?
Well, of course, we don't really know, but what we began to explore, what Carol began to explore, actually, was what was happening in various laboratories, and I would hand it over to her at this point.
In the military especially, but let me just speak briefly about the easiest way to become invisible is to work with the fact that in the
a number of people would see it, but we've always...
Now, when you say deliberately staged so the maximum number of people would see it, that's quite a statement. Why do you say that?
Well, because, I mean, that's to get into that case, which is complicated enough.
Go ahead. That's all right. We can get into it a little bit.
But the basic point here was a procession of cars with diplomats aboard heading down South Street on the east side of Manhattan in 1989 and at the end of November. And this was right at the time international politics were absolutely aboil. The Berlin Wall was about to come down. There was a general strike in Czechoslovakia. Poland was falling apart. The Russian Empire, so to speak, was falling apart, and there were meetings and chaos at the United Nations, and this group of important people were driving down at 3 in the morning, down South Street, heading towards the ferry terminal so that they could be taken to Governor's Island, where they would take helicopters to another international meeting, highly placed people in these cars, and all of those cars were stopped, apparently by the UFO interference with their electrical systems. And when they were stopped, as if the audience had been put in its seats, then, and only then, the UFO above the nearby apartment building turned on all of its lights in full view of this procession of extremely important international figures. And Linda Cortila was floated out a 12-story window in full view of everybody, along with the aliens. And the story goes on from there. But essentially, it was as if the UFO occupants were making a demonstration. They could have done all this in complete darkness and invisibility. And in fact, nobody saw Linda Cortila being returned to her apartment at the end of the abduction. So you have to assume that this is a deliberate act. I may be wrong there, but all the evidence suggests it was. But my point is that invisibility, as it seems to have been from the beginning, an aspect of the abduction.
I'm very pleased to welcome Bud Hopkins to the program today. I'm so proud to have Bud with us. Later, we're going to have a few minutes of a special. There's something extraordinary happened this week. Dave Louthan will be with us. Dave is the man who on December 26th slaughtered with his own hands the cow that was later discovered to be the mad cow that caused all the controversy. Now the USDA is saying the problem's over. Dave Louthan is saying not so. He's warning us, be careful. So stay with us after Bud, because this is very serious stuff. Bud, as wife Carol Rainey and he have written a phenomenal new book called Sight Unseen, Science, UFO Invisibility, and Transgenic Beings. Carol is a distinguished documentarist in her own right. She has done documentaries and dramas for PBS, for cable networks, international TV. Recently, she did a program called What's New About Menopause for Nova. She has done animated children's videos, also other work for PBS. So these two extraordinary and distinguished people have come together to publish what I believe is very arguably the finest book on the abduction experience ever written. An awesome volume indeed, and welcome both of you to my radio program.
Thanks a lot, Whitley.
Well, thank you. That's a rather extravagant and flattering introduction. I very much appreciate it.
Oh, it's all entirely false. No, I'm joking. It's not false. It's absolutely heartfelt, every bit of it.
Right.
And now let's go, Bud. I hardly know where to begin in talking to you or to the two of you, because Sight Unseen, it gradually becomes overwhelming, the evidence that is presented in the book. And it just